today is from Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 to 13. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go unto my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So, after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will surely multiply your offspring, so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing," for she said, "Truly here I have seen him who looks after me."
Thanks, Raymond. Feel a little bit like deja vu. If you were here last week and you were listening, which I know isn't necessarily all of you, I get that, you'll be thinking, didn't we just hear those exact same verses last week? Rusty, what are you up to? Are you trying to do one of these 2-for-1 sort of deals here? Yes. That's exactly what I'm doing. Please have some compassion on me. It was a short week for me. This is day 3 without my wife. This is where you go, "Aw, aw." Apparently, keeping 3 little girls fed and clothed and alive is a 24-hour job. Who knew? Some of you know. So anyway, my wife's going to come back, and I'm going to have much more respect for what she does. And so anyway, she left Friday morning with a few of the gals. They went down to Muskoka. They're coming back this evening. And so we've done okay. In fact, just to be honest, Annika found their clothes this morning. She dressed the 3 of them. She combed their hair. She put on their shoes. So it wasn't actually that bad. But so I am trying to get a little bit more mileage out of this story before we move on. We are going through the life of Abraham together. We'll be going through that for a few more weeks. We looked at this exact same story last week, but we didn't really kind of plumb the depths here. I think there's something else going on in chapter 16 that is important and that we need to see, we need to hear, because we find ourselves in a very similar position if we were to think about it. In Genesis chapter 16, we have 4 characters. We have the barren woman, the stupid man, the oppressed slave, and we have the mysterious friend. Last week, we looked at those last two characters. We looked at the oppressed slave Hagar, and we looked at the mysterious friend, who we discovered was the Lord himself. And just a quick recap, as we looked at those two characters, we find in this story that Hagar is a slave. Okay? Hagar is a nobody. Nobody cares for Hagar. Nobody cares about her needs. Nobody cares how she feels. Nobody asks Hagar her questions. Nobody calls Hagar by name. She is just a pawn to be used by others to get what they want to get. Nobody cares for her except, we find out, for this mysterious friend, the Lord himself, who comes to her in her affliction as she flees her mistreatment. And he says to her, Hagar, where are you coming from? Where are you going? And in this interaction with Hagar, she finds out she isn't a nobody. After all, God sees her. God cares for her. God calls her by name, and God gives her this incredible blessing. Even though she's a nobody in everybody else's eyes, she's not a nobody in God's eyes. She's a somebody. And that makes all the difference to Hagar. And so she goes back to her tough situation, but she goes back a free woman, no longer a slave. Because she says, I have seen the one who sees me. She thinks totally different about herself. The knowledge of God's care for her frees her and gives her significance. She is heard. She is understood. She is cared for. So that's what we looked at last week. This morning we're going to look at the other woman. Because this chapter really it's a tale of two women. It's a tale of a slave who gets set free by the Lord, and then a story of a free woman who is enslaved. And that's Sarah. So the chapter begins by saying, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. But she had an idea. She had a slave. And in their culture, what you could do is you could offer your slave to your husband, and he could impregnate her. And that baby would be considered your baby. And this was common practice back in those days, even though it's a shock to us. And it should be a shock to us. Why did Sarah give Hagar, her slave, to Abram? Why did she do that? Now, when I've read this story, and a lot of what I've kind of read in commentaries, focuses on the fact that, well, Sarai knows the promise of God, that Abram and her are going to have a child, and from this child is going to be made a great nation with this great blessing. But it's been a long time now. It's been at least a decade, and still no baby. What gives? And so we might think, okay, what she's doing here, she's saying, okay, the Lord needs a little bit of help. I'm going to help out God here, and we're going to make this happen. And so we can see in Sarai's actions that what she's doing is she's really trying to help God fulfill his promise to them. Maybe that's kind of what's going on here, but I don't know. I think there's something else happening here. I really don't think Sarah, we'll just call her Sarah from now on, that's easier. I really don't think Sarah's thinking about God and his promise here. I think Sarah's thinking about herself. She says, these are the thoughts going on in her head. This is what she says to her husband. She says, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. So why does she do this? She wants a baby. She wants a baby bad. I don't think she's thinking about God. She's not thinking about the promise. She's thinking about how badly she wants a baby. And how badly she has wanted a baby from the very beginning. She's thinking about herself. She's trying to make a name for herself. And how is she going to do that? Well, she's going to get a family. She's going to get offspring through this slave object of hers, Hagar. So what's going on here? And to really understand the dynamic, because we are so far removed from this culture, we have to understand that Sarah belonged to a culture where a woman was significant to the degree that she could produce children. Now, there are still some cultures like this today, but that's I don't think ours. How many of you women go, I just want more kids? My honor would grow with the number of kids I have. My greatest desire is to have 15 children. Then I'd be somebody. Any of you ladies? Probably not anymore. But in Sarah's day, that was everything in their culture. That's how you got honor from your society. That's how you knew you were a somebody. You had children. And other people looked on you and said, you are a success. Sarah, from birth, as she was being raised, she would have been conditioned to think that success meant you had kids, lots of kids. Right? That's how you got honor in the world. That's how you became somebody. And so they had a word if you didn't. Remember what that word is? It's kind of one of those old-fashioned words. If you couldn't bear children, you were barren. What a nasty word. We don't even use that word anymore, do we? I mean, Jordan, you're the youngin' here. Do you even know what the word barren means? You ever heard that word before? Well, yeah, but you're a smart kid, so just... I forgot you read your Bible a lot. Yeah, we've kind of dropped that from the vocabulary, haven't we? Because we thought, hey, this isn't right. Because that whole word barren really suggests that if you can't have children, then you're a failure as a woman. And we don't think that anymore, right? Or at least not here in our culture. In some cultures of the world, they still would see that as the way to significance. But to be barren would be to say that if you can't produce kids, you're a failure as a woman. I met someone here in town a few weeks ago, obviously from a different culture, and from one of these sort of cultures where the needs of your family, the demands of your society, the group took precedence over your desires and your needs. So your family would get together with another person's family, and you would connect the son and the daughter, and you would arrange a marriage. Can you believe that? But someone in our town who is in an arranged marriage and not doing too bad. But she told me that that's what happened. Her mommy and daddy got together with his mommy and daddy. They made an arrangement, right? Is this going to benefit our families? They didn't ask her, is this what you want? Is this going to benefit our families? Is this going to make us fare better in the world? And then she said that she got to spend 10 minutes with the guy to get to know him a little bit before the deal was struck. We go, how primitive, right? How backwards that the individual wouldn't mean anything, the needs of the individual, that the needs of the group would supersede the needs of the person. The criteria was, did it help your family? In other words, you're, again, like Hagar, you're just kind of the pawn. You're the object. And we say that's so oppressive. Thank goodness we don't live in a culture like that. How many of you are thankful you don't live in a culture like that? Right? Thank goodness we don't live in a culture like that, but we live in one that says you can be whoever you want to be. You can marry whoever you want to marry, except that isn't true, is it? You can marry whoever you want to attract. Right? You can't marry whoever you want. You can marry whoever you can get to marry you. Right? What? right? You can't marry whoever you want. It doesn't work that way. I think that's a crime. You can marry whoever you can attract. It's interesting. Researchers say that back in Sarah's day, and really up until modern times, nobody had ever heard of eating disorders. Didn't exist. Right? That's a modern phenomenon. The point is this. Every culture has a definition of what it means to be barren. In Sarah's culture, it was, you couldn't have kids. Sorry. Barren, fruitless, failure. But you know what? That was their culture. That ain't our culture. But every culture has a definition of what it means, what it looks like to be barren. Unless you have this thing, you are a failure. Every culture has that, including our own. Every culture has a pattern of thinking, a pattern of values. And Paul says in Romans 12:2, he says, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. What is a culture? A culture is a pattern, right? A pattern of values, of behaviors, of ways of thinking, of ways of getting meaning. It's easy to see the pattern in a different culture. Some of you have traveled. You can go to a different culture. I've been to Rwanda and Mongolia, and right away you can see this is different. They think differently. They're weird people, okay? There's something wrong with these people that they think that's important. Right? That they try so hard to do that. It's easy to see the pattern in other cultures, but we don't often recognize the patterns in our own culture. We just assume it. Because we were born in it, we were raised in it, it's maybe all we've known, and we don't even think that there is a pattern around us that we find ourselves in. We have this conception that wherever we live is the norm, right? It's the reference point. It's the neutral. It's the way it should be. I found this crayon in the kids' room there. Anybody know? I know it's far away. What color is this crayon? Some of you gave the right answer. Well, close to the right. It's actually apricot, Cindy. It's not peach. Peach would be a little. You're right. It's, I didn't really hear. I heard one peach, and I heard a whole bunch of skin and flesh. Isn't that interesting? Well, yeah, it's your skin, right? I grew up calling this skin color, right? Doesn't that come from an attitude that, now the brown one I call brown. The black one I call black. The yellow one I call yellow. This one I call skin, right? Do you realize how cultural that is? You just assume, right? You just assume skin. A skin color. That's the way it is. That's normal. Accents. We talk right, everybody else talks funny. Like that guy right there. I asked, okay, Rob's your name? Rob, say water. See? Weird, right? Rob's from Australia, and he's the guy who's married to someone who's speaking out at Galilean this morning. And he speaks funny, right? Doesn't he know it's water? Water? Wada? Wada? Right? I've always thought it's weird with accents. Like when you try to correct the way someone else says a word, as if there's a right way to say it and wrong ways to say it. Who determines that? It's your way to say it. That's your culture's way of saying it, right? There's not a neutral way to say water. There's a whole bunch of different ways of saying it. All that to say, we are so slow to recognize the pattern that we've been born into and surrounded with. And it's easy to recognize the patterns and the flaws of those patterns in different cultures. And because we're slow to recognize the pattern of which we are a part, we're susceptible to fit into it, right? Because we are so slow to subject it to critique. So what do? We just fit into the pattern. We don't even know it half the time. Paul says, do not be conformed to the pattern. A pattern is something that was there before you even showed up, before you were born. There was a pattern. Before you were born, so people around you and people before you had decided what it meant to be barren and what it meant to be fruitful. Somebody else decided that. And you were born into that. And for different cultures, it's going to be different. But every culture has a definition of barrenness and a definition of fruitfulness. That thing that if you would get it, would make you somebody, and that thing that if you don't get it, makes you nobody. And even within cultures, that's within our culture, there's little different cultures, right? So Jordan walks the halls of high school. In that culture, in teenager culture, there's going to be a definition around you, Jordan, for what it means to be barren, what it means to be somebody, and what it means to be nobody. For you seniors, in your world, in your circle, there's going to be, I don't really know what it is because I'm way, way far away from that myself. So I won't tell you what that is, but if you think hard enough, what does it mean to be barren? What does it mean to be fruitful? It's not only our culture around us, but it's our families as well. And maybe this as much as anything, there's a pattern. You were born into a pattern in your family that you didn't pick. You were just born into it. Your parents created or perpetuated a pattern. And you were raised in that pattern of what it meant to be fruitful and what it meant to be barren. So what was that in your family? What was it that if you would strive for because it was that would show that you had arrived, that you had made something of yourself, that you were somebody? What was that in your family? It's funny how that changes from age to age. In the 50s, if you watch the commercials from the 50s and 60s, it's just like two totally different worlds, isn't it? What was the 50s? You watch commercials from the 50s, for us men, we call that the good old days, right? Right? Because that's where our wives were at home, right? Were they really? No, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. Because you know I'm speaking sarcastically. I hope, kind of. So, they had the apron on, meals, tidy house, foot massages for the hardworking man when he got home. The 50s was a great decade, right? And at that point, what did it mean for a woman to be fruitful, not to be barren? It was to play that role. And then somebody said, hey, we don't like this pattern, right? We don't like this pattern. Who said that that's what it meant? Who said that that's what fruitfulness looked like? Who said this is what barrenness looked like? And they decided something else, right? It meant not to pump out a bunch of babies. It meant to go make something of yourself. Be productive. Get into the workforce. Get a job. Get independent. And it was like a complete reversal. But it doesn't really matter what it is. Either way, there is a pattern of what it means for you to be somebody or to be nobody. In Sarah's culture, it was to have children. In ours, it's something else. In your family, it's probably something else. What's going on here isn't just a cultural transaction, but there's something spiritual happening here. There's a spiritual transaction happening. In 16 verse 2, when Sarah says to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children, so go sleep with my wife. Perhaps I can build a family through her." There was a decision to make here. There's something deeply spiritual happening here. Sarah was obviously a religious person. She knew God. She knew of God. She knew the promise of God. She stood in a favored position, but here she had a choice, okay? Because all of that bumped up against the thing that everybody around her told her she needed in order to be significant, in order to be somebody. And she had to choose between those two things, between trusting God and believing God and having a baby and having that thing. When push came to shove, she chose the baby. She chose that thing which she had always been taught was what you need in order to be somebody. So this is kind of the irony in this chapter here. The irony is you have these two women. Hagar the slave becomes free. Hagar the one who's a pawn, who serves other people's needs, but is a nobody herself. She meets God, a God who sees her, who cares for her, who knows her name, who gives her blessing, and she is set free inwardly. And the irony here is that the slave becomes free and the free woman becomes enslaved. The one who knows God, the one who has already had the promise of God's blessing, the one who's in the favored position, the free woman becomes enslaved. Hagar had to do what others told her to do, but the knowledge of God towards her gave her salvation and significance. But Sarah turns from God and instead strives after what others tell her she needs to do in order to be somebody, in order to not be barren. She steps into the role of a slave. And the consequence is a slave serving the pattern of others. So the consequences here are immediate. Right away, all right, the deed is done. Hagar is pregnant. She knows it. Sarah knows it. And the consequences of Sarah's choice here are terrible. She starts to suffer herself emotionally. She's broken about this. Now that person has the thing that I've wanted all these years and could never, ever get. And it was so easy. It was so easy for her to get that thing. And you see this woman, she's emotionally traumatized. She even says to her husband, "It's your fault." Women are great at doing that, right? That's where I want to hear a lot of laughter, not like, "Oh my goodness." She says to him, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering." Right? She says, "I am suffering" here. Every day she had to see someone who easily got what she strived for but failed to get. So that led to self-hatred of herself. She took that on. She took on that pattern and that definition of barrenness, and she hated herself because she was a failure. Not only did that lead to kind of self-hatred, but it led to Hagar hatred. How does she respond to the one then who was a competitor, who got what she so wanted but couldn't get? By mistreating her, by oppressing her, by beating her. And so the consequences of her enslavement are immediate. You see, this is not a free woman. This is not a free woman. So the question for us is this. Being that every culture has a definition of barrenness, there is a pattern to your family, there's a pattern to our culture. The question for us is, what are you a slave to? What is it that you say to yourself or others say to you, if only I could achieve that, I would not be barren. I would be somebody. What is that thing that you are a slave to, or that thing that seeks to enslave you? What is that thing in your culture? What is that thing in your family that without it you'd be barren? Maybe this is an exercise you can go home and do yourself or do around your table. If there's others around your table. You could finish the statement, in my family, barrenness was blank. In my family, barrenness was blank because there was something. There was some definition of it. And you maybe took that thing into your heart without even ever recognizing it or subjecting it to criticism. You just took it into your heart as Sarah took into her heart that thing with which other people gave her and said, this is what it means to be somebody. And she just accepted it into her heart. And strove for that, and it enslaved her, and those things enslave us. So what we need to see in the story is that it's possible to have a privileged position with God, and like Sarah, who knew God, had got the promise of God's blessing. It's possible to be in a privileged position with God and turn away from that and to conform to the pattern of this world and to take that thing, whatever that thing is, to take it into your heart as the way to significance. Paul says in Romans 12:2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But be transformed. And so he says, don't conform to the pattern of the world, be transformed. It's interesting there. If you're like an English major, you notice, okay, that the verb there, conform, is active. That's what you're doing. Do not conform. Okay, do not do that. Do not strive, but instead of that, be transformed. Notice he doesn't say transform yourself, because that's part of the problem. You're doing. He says it's not about you. Be transformed. It's a passive word. In other words, conform is something you do. Be transformed is something you let another do to you. We can't transform ourselves. We can only be transformed. We can't do, we can only receive, is what Paul is saying. By the renewing of your mind, this new way of thinking, because the Christian gospel is totally antithetical to all the ways of human culture, which is do this and you'll be blessed. Do this and you'll be somebody. The gospel is diametrically going in the other direction. The Christian gospel says it's not about achievement. It's about receivement, which I don't think is a word, but that doesn't bother me. Okay? Because it rhymes. The gospel says it's not about achievement. It's about receivement. That's what the gospel is. The gospel of Jesus Christ says you don't become somebody and then you're blessed. And then you get, right? The gospel is, I love you and I give to you, not because of what you do, but in spite of what you do. Not because of who you are, but in spite of who you are. God says, you are a somebody because I love you. You are a somebody because I gave my son for you. And by believing in him and trusting in him and just receiving, you receive ultimate significance. You receive ultimate salvation. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. You can't achieve it. You can only receive it. Gospel cannot be achieved, and to think it can, whatever that way of achieving is enslaving. Significance can only be given by God and received by us. It can only be given by God and received by us. So if you find your significance in Jesus Christ and who he says you are, only then will you not be a slave. That's what the story tells us. Only when you find your significance in what God is to you what he says you are, not in anything about yourself or anything you do, only then will you be free. Only then will you not have to achieve that thing that someone else has said you need to achieve in order to be somebody. If you know that as much as you love your family, your spouse, your kids, as much as you love your career, as much as you love your ministry, as much as you love your business, if you're a businessman or your art, if you're an artist or your music, if you're a musician, or your ministry, if you're a minister, if you know that these are just good things, and that's it, but no longer your masters, no longer the things you have to have, or you're barren, you're a nobody, only then God says, will you have inner freedom? Anything else is enslavement. So God is saying, yes, Natasha, almost done. 2 minutes here, sweetie. Don't time me. So I think here's the point. This is what God is saying to us here in this story. He's saying, you will be a slave to your culture. You'll be a slave to the pattern around you, the pattern of your family, whatever it is. You will be a slave to that until your heart is totally convinced that I love you and that you are worth loving on the basis of who you are and not on the basis of your performance at all. Until your heart's totally convinced of that, it says, you'll be a slave, something. Only when your heart is fully convinced of that will your anxieties and your frustrations cease. Only when you're totally convinced of that and looking to that will your self-loathing cease and you will be free. So the question for each of us, looking at Sarah and how Sarah turned away from the significance God had given her, he just gave her. Not because who she was, he just gave it to her. And she turned and she took into her heart the thing that others around her told her was the thing that would make her somebody. So the question is there anything that you have taken into your heart as the thing that will make you somebody? Is there anything you have taken into your heart as the thing that if you would get it would make you somebody? And without it, you'd be barren. If in pondering that question you say, yeah, or you sense that there's something vying for your heart, recognize that. And if you've given your heart to that in any way, repent of that. Ask God to forgive you for turning away from the significance that he freely gives and turning to that thing. Return to him, and instead of trying to achieve it, simply receive it and believe it. Instead of trying to achieve it, simply receive it and believe it, and you will be free. Amen.